The hammering on my front door started before the coffee finished brewing. 6:15 in the morning, late October, the kind of cold that makes the windows in my old farmhouse rattle even when there's no wind. I knew the sound of cop knuckles before I'd even set my mug down. 22 years on the bench teaches you that knock. 3 hard, evenly spaced, no rhythm to it. Official. I opened the door in my robe and slippers, and there was a Marshall County deputy on my porch holding a manila folder, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Behind him, parked across the gravel road that runs past my property, was my stepson's black F-150. He was leaning against the hood with his arms crossed, smiling. My daughter was in the passenger seat, and she had her phone up, recording. "Sir, are you Theodore Ashby?" "I am. I have a writ of possession here. I'm required to serve it on the current resident of 4412 Old Mill Road." I looked at the folder. Then I looked across the road at my son-in-law. He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, loud enough to spook the crows out of my pecan tree, "Pack it up, old-timer. You got 2 hours to clear out." Then he laughed, that stupid honking laugh he's had since the day my daughter brought him home for Thanksgiving 5 years ago. I should tell you something about myself before this goes any further. My name is Theodore Ashby. I'm 71 years old, and I live by myself on 26 acres of Tennessee farmland that my grandfather cleared with 2 mules and a cant-hook in 1923. My wife Eleanor died of pancreatic cancer in the spring of 2021. We had 1 daughter together. Before I retired, I sat as a Chancery Court judge in Middle Tennessee for 22 years, and before that I practiced real estate and probate law for almost 2 decades. The reason that matters will become clear in a minute. I took the folder from the deputy. "Son, what's your name?" "Deputy Reyes, sir." "Deputy Reyes, would you mind stepping inside for just a moment? It's freezing out here, and I'd like to read this on my kitchen table where the light's better." He hesitated. They train them not to enter without cause, but I'm an old man in a bathrobe, and I think he'd already started to feel the wrongness of the situation, the way a deer feels, a storm coming before the clouds show up. He stepped in. I poured him a cup of coffee. He didn't drink it, but he held it. I opened the folder. It was a writ of possession based on a quitclaim deed. The deed claimed I had transferred 4412 Old Mill Road and the surrounding 26 acres to my daughter Caroline Ashby Pruitt and her husband Darren Pruitt on September 8th of that year, for the consideration of $1 and love and affection. Notarized by a woman named Sherry Beasley out of Coffee County. Filed with the Marshall County Register of Deeds on September 11th. Now, here's what's funny. I have not signed a deed of any kind in 11 years, since I refinanced this place in 2014 to put a new metal roof on the barn. And I know this because, like I said, I spent 2 decades doing real estate work. I know what my signature looks like on a recorded instrument, the flourish on the T in Theodore. The way I always cross the dot of the I in Ashby with a tiny bar. The way I sign the date in long form, never numerical, never. Old habits from the bench. This signature was none of those things. It was the kind of forgery a man does after watching a YouTube tutorial. Worse, the notary acknowledgement block had the wrong county jurat language. Tennessee notaries say personally appeared before me. This one said, appeared before me personally. A small thing, the kind of thing only an old probate lawyer would notice. But the thing that really tipped me off, the thing that almost made me laugh out loud right there in front of the deputy, was the legal description. Whoever drafted this used the metes and bounds from the 1987 survey. I had a new survey done in 2018 after my neighbor Earl Hutchins and I corrected the fence line on the west property boundary. The new description had been on every tax record for 7 years. Anybody who pulled the property card to draft a deed would have used the current description. Whoever drafted this pulled my old file from somewhere. I knew where to. Caroline had asked to borrow the key to my safe deposit box 6 months ago, said she wanted to look at her mother's wedding ring, see if it would fit her right hand. That's where I keep my old deeds. I closed the folder. Deputy Reyes, what's the name of the attorney whose firm filed this writ? He flipped through. Looks like a Mr. Holloway. Stuart Holloway, out of Murfreesboro. I knew Stu Holloway. He was about 40, ambitious, the kind of lawyer who'd take any case if the retainer cleared. Not a bad man, just hungry. He had no idea what his clients had brought him. Deputy, before you go any further, I want you to look at something. I walked over to the secretary desk in my front hall and pulled out the file I keep with my homeowner's documents, my title insurance policy, my survey, and a copy of the original 2014 refinance deed. I brought it back to the kitchen and laid both deeds side by side. Look at the legal description on yours. He looked. Now look at the legal description on mine. He looked. His jaw started to work the way men's jaws work when they realize something is very wrong. Now look at the signature. He looked at both. He set the coffee down. Sir, he said quietly, this signature does not match. It does not. And I have not transferred this property. Not to anyone. Not for any consideration. Not by any instrument. I want you to call your sergeant before you take another step. Out across the road, my son-in-law had stopped leaning. He'd straightened up. He could tell something had gone sideways and he didn't know what. Deputy Reyes radioed his sergeant. While he was on the radio, I looked through my kitchen window at the truck across the road. My daughter had lowered her phone. Caroline, 43 years old. The little girl who used to ride on my shoulders at the Tennessee State Fair and beg for candy apples. The teenager who cried in my arms when her first boyfriend dumped her senior year of high school. The young woman who held my hand at her mother's funeral 2.5 years ago and whispered, Daddy, what are we going to do without her? That same person had sat in a F-150 at 6:15 in the morning, holding a phone up, recording her father being thrown out of his own house in a robe and slippers. I want you to understand. I wasn't angry yet. I was something colder than that. I was a man whose body had finally caught up with what his mind had been suspecting for months and refusing to admit, the way you sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, already knowing the dream you were having was important. When Deputy Reyes ended his call, his face was pale. Sergeant Doyle is on his way out. He says nobody touches anything. He says the writ is suspended pending review. He turned to me, Judge Ashby. I'd recognized him by then. Reyes. Anthony Reyes. He'd come through my courtroom 3 years before I retired, on a juvenile matter where his little brother had gotten into trouble with a stolen four-wheeler. I'd given the kid a deferred adjudication and ordered restitution. The whole family had thanked me afterward. You remember me, I said. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir. I had no idea this address. You did your job, son. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. Now I need you to do one more thing. I need you to ask the 2 people across the street to stay right where they are until your sergeant gets here. He went to it. I watched through the window. My son-in-law tried to argue, tried to get back in the truck and leave. Reyes stepped in front of the door and put his hand on his belt. Not on his weapon, just on the belt, and said something I couldn't hear. Caroline got out of the truck and started crying. Real tears this time, I could tell, because she did that thing she'd done since she was 4, where she pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth. I sat down at my kitchen table and let the coffee go cold and tried to remember when this had started. It started at her mother's funeral, or rather, it started a few weeks after. Eleanor and I had been married for 46 years when the cancer took her. The diagnosis came in November of 2020. She was gone by April. There's no point describing those months. Anyone who's lost the person they love already knows. Anyone who hasn't doesn't need me explaining it. What I will say is that Caroline and Darren were attentive during those months in a way I had not expected. They drove down from Nashville every weekend. Darren brought groceries. Caroline cooked. They sat with Eleanor in the hospice room and held her hand. I was grateful. I told them so. I told them sitting on the back porch one June evening after Eleanor was already gone, that I didn't know how I would have gotten through it without them. I'm sure that's the moment Darren did the math. The estate, when it settled, came to a little over $800,000, not counting the land. Eleanor had been a high school principal for 31 years. She had a state pension that converted to a survivor benefit, plus a 403B we'd been feeding for decades, plus the life insurance, plus our joint savings. The land and the house, free and clear, was worth somewhere between $600,000 and $700,000 on the open market. Tennessee farmland with road frontage and a creek running through the back 40 has appreciated like crazy since the pandemic. So I was sitting on roughly $1.5 million in assets, and I was a 70-year-old widower living alone on 26 acres. The visits got more frequent. Caroline would drive down on a Tuesday afternoon just to check on you, Daddy. Darren would come on weekends with his laptop talking about a real estate deal he was working on, asking my opinion. He's a residential mortgage broker by trade. Mediocre at it from what I could tell, always between deals. In February, Caroline brought me paperwork. She said she'd been talking to a financial advisor and that I should think about estate planning. What if something happens to you, Daddy? We don't want it to be a mess like with Mum. It wasn't a mess with her mother. Eleanor and I had a perfectly clean joint trust. But I let her talk. She brought me a stack of forms, a healthcare power of attorney, a durable financial power of attorney, a HIPAA release. She said she'd had her family lawyer draft them. She said all I had to do was sign, and we'd have peace of mind. I'm a former Chancery Court judge. I read every word. The healthcare POO was fine. The HIPAA was fine. The durable financial power of attorney would have given Caroline full authority over my accounts, my assets, and any real or personal property I owned, effective immediately. Not springing. Not contingent on incapacity. Effective on signing. I told her I appreciated the thought, and that I'd have my own attorney draft what I wanted, and that I'd send her a copy when it was done. Her face did something I'd never seen it do. It went still. Just for half a second, then she smiled and said, "Of course, Daddy. Whatever makes you comfortable." I should have known them. I think part of me did. In April, Caroline asked to borrow the key to my safe deposit box. I gave it to her. She brought it back the next day with her mother's wedding ring. But I noticed she came back later than the bank's closing time would allow if she'd just stopped by once. I didn't say anything. In June, my daughter and son-in-law took a vacation to St. Lucia. 8 days, all-inclusive. Caroline posted pictures on Facebook. Darren posted a picture of a Rolex on his wrist that he hadn't been wearing the last time I'd seen him. I didn't say anything. In August, they came down for a long weekend. Darren walked the property with me. He asked about the well. He asked about the septic. He asked what I thought the place would sell for. I told him I had no plans to sell. He laughed and said, "Oh, I know, Pop, just curious. Real estate's my line of work." In September, I noticed mail from the Marshall County Register of Deeds had been opened and resealed. The flap had been steined and re-glued badly. I saw it on a Tuesday afternoon when I came in from feeding the chickens. I didn't say anything to Caroline. I calls my old law partner instead, a man named Wendell Mathis, who'd been my closest friend for going on 40 years and who still practiced part-time out of his home in Lewisburg. "Wendell," I said, "I think my daughter's husband is trying to steal my farm." There was a long silence on the phone. Then Wendell said, "Theo, you come over here right now and let's talk." That had been 6 weeks before Deputy Reyes knocked on my door. So when Sergeant Doyle pulled up in his cruiser that October morning, I was not unprepared. Wendell and I had spent 6 weeks quietly building a record. We had pulled my recorded deed history from the Register of Deeds. We had documented the chain of title going back to 1923. We had ordered handwriting samples of my own signature from the bank, the DMV, and the Chancery Court Clerk's office where I'd signed thousands of orders. We had hired a forensic document examiner out of Knoxville named Dr. Linda Beaufort, a woman with 35 years of experience and a CV that ran 12 pages. We had her on retainer. We had also, and this is the part I'm proudest of, asked the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Unit to keep a quiet file open on the matter. Wendell knew an assistant special agent in charge from a case they'd worked years ago. The TBI didn't open a formal investigation, not yet, but they accepted our preliminary documentation and noted the names. Caroline Ashby Pruitt. Darren Pruitt. They flagged it. So when Sergeant Doyle stepped onto my porch that morning, I had a full briefing folder ready to hand him. Photocopies of my real signature from a dozen sources. A preliminary report from Dr. Beaufort comparing it to the forged signature on the recorded quitclaim. A list of dates that Caroline had visited me, including the day she had borrowed my safe deposit key. The whole architecture. Sergeant Doyle was about my age. Grey-headed. The kind of man who'd been a deputy for 30 years and wasn't impressed by much. He read for a long time. He asked Reyes to step outside and keep the Pruitts in the yard. Then he looked up at me. "Judge, I'm going to be straight with you. I can't make a fraud arrest on the strength of a preliminary report. That's the DA's call. But I can tell you that this writ of possession is dead on arrival. And I'm going to walk across that road and tell those two people that they're free to leave, but that they should expect contact from investigators very soon. That's all I'm asking, Sergeant." He went out. I stood at my front window and watched him talk to my daughter and her husband. Darren did most of the talking. He was angry, gesturing, pointing at my house. Caroline was just standing there with her arms wrapped around herself, looking at the ground. At one point she looked up toward my window, and our eyes met across that gravel road, and I saw something in her face I had not seen since she was a child. She looked afraid of me. She should have been. The next 4 months were the hardest months of my life since Eleanor died, and they were also, I'll admit, the most alive I had felt since Eleanor died. I want to be careful how I say this. There is no satisfaction in destroying your own daughter. There is no satisfaction in watching the boy who walked her down the aisle, and the boy she chose to stand at the other end of it. Both look at you across a courtroom and realize they are not going to win. I felt no joy. I felt purpose, which is different. Wendell and I, with Dr. Carr, 04's full report in hand, went to the Marshall County District Attorney's office in early November. The DA was a woman named Patricia Lowe, late 40s, brilliant. She'd argued cases in front of me on the bench. She read our package, asked us about a dozen questions, and told us she'd present to the grand jury in January. In the meantime, Wendell filed a civil quiet title action and a motion to expunge the fraudulent deed from the Register of Deeds. We did not file it under seal. We filed it openly, in Marshall County Chancery Court, where every lawyer in 3 counties would see it on the docket. That filing, combined with the TBI investigation that quietly opened the same week, set off a chain reaction Caroline and Darren never saw coming. The notary, Sherry Beasley, hired her own lawyer within 48 hours. She was looking at felony charges for false acknowledgement, a Class E felony in Tennessee, plus loss of her commission and probably loss of her job at a title company in Manchester. She rolled. She gave a sworn statement that she had never met me, never seen me, and had been told by Darren Pruitt that I was elderly and homebound, and that he was bringing the documents to her to save the old man a trip. She had notarized them based on his representation. She admitted the procedure was improper. She kept her freedom in exchange for full cooperation. She agreed to testify. That was the end of the case for Darren, although he didn't know it yet. What he also didn't know was that the TBI, once they got going, ran his finances. Darren Pruitt, my son-in-law, the residential mortgage broker, had not closed a deal in 8 months. He had over $11,000 in delinquent property taxes on the suburban Nashville house where he and Caroline lived. He had a balloon payment coming due on a second mortgage in March. He'd taken out a $120,000 personal loan from a hard money lender in May, with a promissory note that came due in November of that year. The lender was, shall we say, not a bank. The lender was the kind of man who breaks fingers when promissory notes mature unpaid. Darren had been trying to steal my farm because he had 30 days to repay a $120,000 loan to a man who would hurt him if he didn't. Caroline, when the TBI agents interviewed her in early December, broke down completely. She told them, through tears, that Darren had pressured her, that Darren had threatened her, that she had borrowed the safe deposit key to get the old deed because Darren said he needed it for estate planning purposes, that she had not understood what was happening until the writ was served, and that she had been told they were just going to take the property to refinance it. not actually evict me. I read the transcript of her interview when it was made available through Discovery. I read it in Wendell's office, with Wendell sitting across the desk from me, watching my face. "Well?" he said when I was finished. "It might be true," I said. "Some of it. Theo, what?" "She drove down here at 6:15 in the morning to film it." I sat with that for a long time. "Yes," I said. "She did. The grand jury indicted both of them on January 14th. Conspiracy to commit theft over $60,000. Forgery, filing a false instrument, fraudulent acquisition of real property. In Tennessee, those charges, stacked, carry potential sentences in the 10 to 20-year range for a first offender. Darren also got hit with one count of identity theft for the digitized version of my signature that the TBI's forensic computer team found on his laptop when they served the warrant. Caroline got charged with conspiracy and with being an accessory. They lawyered up. Darren hired a defense attorney out of Nashville, the kind that wears expensive suits and takes cases on contingency through Instagram ads. Caroline hired a quieter, older attorney who had once clerked for me, a woman named Estelle Briggs, who I respected enormously and who I think took the case partly out of a sense of mercy toward Caroline and partly out of a desire to keep her from being railroaded by Darren's lawyer. The case never went to trial. They almost never do. In late February, with the wall of evidence Patricia Lowe had assembled, Darren's lawyer ran the math and recommended a plea. Darren took it. 6 years in the Tennessee Department of Correction with eligibility for parole after 30%. He'd serve about 22 months minimum. He'd be a felon for the rest of his life. He would never hold a Tennessee mortgage broker's license again. The $120,000 hard money loan came due during sentencing. The lender, I am told, sent someone to talk to Darren in lockup. That conversation did not, apparently, go well for Darren. Caroline's plea came 2 weeks later. Estelle Briggs had negotiated her down hard. Caroline got 18 months, all suspended, plus 4 years of supervised probation, 240 hours of community service, full restitution of legal costs to me, mandatory financial crimes counseling, and a felony record. Estelle had argued, and the DA had reluctantly accepted, that Caroline had been under the controlling influence of her husband and was a first offender. The DA accepted partly because Caroline cooperated against Darren in a way that strengthened the case considerably. Caroline was not going to prison. She was going to live her life, walk free, with a felony hanging around her neck for the rest of it. I was in the courtroom for both pleas. I sat in the second row. I did not testify. I did not testify. I did not address the court. I just sat there. When Caroline was let out after her sentencing, our eyes met across the bar of the court, and she opened her mouth to say something, and I shook my head. Just once. Slow. And she closed her mouth and was let out. I want to tell you about one more thing before I'm done. 3 months after Caroline's sentencing, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The return address was a P.O. box in Murfreesboro, where Caroline had moved after the divorce. She filed for divorce from Darren the week after his plea. I don't blame her for that. He wasn't going to be much of a husband from inside the walls. I let the letter sit on my kitchen counter for 2 days. Eleanor's old ceramic rooster sat next to it, the one she'd bought at a flea market in Crossville 30 years ago, and that I had never had the heart to move, the letter and the rooster, side by side, for 2 days. On the third day I opened it. It was 4 handwritten pages. Caroline has beautiful handwriting. She always did. I taught her cursive at the kitchen table when she was 7, the same kitchen table where Deputy Reyes had set down a cup of coffee he didn't drink. The letter said all the things you would expect. A letter said all the things you would expect. A letter from your daughter to say. It said she had been weak. It said Darren had isolated her, manipulated her, made her believe things about me that weren't true. It said she had loved her mother and that she missed her every day. It said she knew she didn't deserve forgiveness and wasn't asking for it, but that she wanted me to know she would carry what she had done for the rest of her life. It said on the last page that she had been pregnant in September, that she had lost the baby in October, 2 days after the writ was served, that she had not told anyone. that she had been alone for it. I read the letter twice, then I folded it and put it in the drawer of the secretary desk in my front hall, the same drawer where I keep my deeds and my title insurance, and the photograph of Eleanor and me on our honeymoon in Gatlinburg in 1976. I have not written back. I don't know yet whether I will. It's been almost a year now. The fraudulent deed was expunged from the Register of Deeds last March. The civil case closed. The criminal case is closed. Darren is in West Tennessee somewhere doing his time. Caroline is in Murfreesboro doing community service at a food bank, by all accounts trying to put her life back together. The farm is still mine. I split firewood now in the afternoons, the way my father did when he was my age. I have a beagle named Hank that a neighbor gave me for my 71st birthday, and Hank sleeps on the rug by the wood stove and dreams about rabbits. I have my friends. I have Wendell, who comes over on Sunday afternoons to play chess and lose. I have my church. I have my chickens. I have the creek in the back 40, where Eleanor and I used to walk in the spring when the dogwoods were blooming. I want to tell you something I learned, because that's what these stories are supposed to do, and because I think it might matter to somebody listening. It is not love that fails us when our children betray us. It is something we mistook for love because it looked like love from where we were standing. Real love does not vanish because it runs into greed. Real love does not require interrogation. What I had was my daughter for 43 years was real on my end. I have to believe it was real on her end too, at least for most of it. What broke it was not me being naive. What broke it was her marrying a drowning man and choosing, when the moment came, to grab onto him instead of onto me. I do not hate her. I cannot. Eleanor wouldn't have allowed it. But I do not trust her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And the hardest thing I have learned in 71 years on this earth is that those two things, not hating someone and not trusting them, can live in the same heart at the same time, and a man can keep going. A man can split his firewood and feed his chickens and pet his dog, and remember his wife, and be all right. That is what justice looks like when it works. Not vengeance, not joy, just the truth, set out on the table with the right names attached to the right deeds, and everyone finally getting what they actually earned. Hank's at the door. He wants out. The light's getting long across the pasture. I've got firewood to bring in before the sun goes down. Thank you for sitting with me through all this. If you've made it this far, do me a favor and tell me in the comments what state you're listening from, and whether you've seen anything like this happen in your own family. And if you have a daddy still living, call him this weekend. The world's a colder place than it ought to be, and nobody knows it longer than the people who've outlived their wives. I'll see you next time. I sat on the porch a long time after the courtrooms went quiet, with Hank snoring at my feet and the pasture going gold the way Tennessee pastures do in late afternoon, and I tried to figure out what had actually happened to my family. The thing I keep coming back to is this. Nothing in that whole mess was an accident. Not one piece of it. Darren did not wake up one morning and decide to forge a deed. He took out a loan he could not repay. Then he took out another loan to cover the first one. Then he made 1,000 small choices, each one a little worse than the last, until forging his father-in-law's signature seemed like the only door left. Caroline did not wake up one morning and decide to record her father's eviction. She made a decision in February, when I told her I would have my own attorney draft my power of attorney to keep helping her husband instead of telling me what he was up to. Every choice after that was just paying interest on the first one. That is what cause and effect actually looks like in a life. It is not loud. It is not sudden. It is just one quiet little compromise built on top of another, until one morning you are sitting in a truck at sunrise, holding up a phone recording your own father in his bathrobe, and you cannot remember when you became the kind of person who could do that. I think there are 3 things a man has to keep alive in himself if he wants to stay whole. The first is character. Not in the abstract sense. I mean the small, daily refusals. Refusing to sign the paper you have not read. Refusing to lie to the people who love you, even when the lie would be easier. refusing to let somebody else's panic become your reason for crossing a line. Caroline lost that 1 inch at a time, and by the time she could see what she had become, she was already inside the trap. The second is judgment. The world is full of charm. Charm is cheap. The hardest thing I had to admit to myself, sitting in Wendell's office back in September, was that I had let Darren walk my property line and ask about the well, because I did not want to embarrass my daughter. I knew in my chest. I just did not want to know in my mouth. A man who will not let himself see what is in front of him is already halfway to losing it. The third is grit. Quiet grit. The kind that does not announce itself. After Eleanor died, I could have folded up. A lot of widowers do, and nobody blames them. But I had a beagle to feed and firewood to split, and a piece of land my grandfather cleared with 2 mules, and somewhere in the back of my chest a stubborn old voice that said, "Get up." So I got up. And when the deputy knocked, I was already standing. I do not know if Caroline will earn her way back to me. That is on her now, not on me. What I know is that the farm is still mine, the dog still sleeps by the stove, and the man my grandfather would have wanted me to be is still, on most days, the man I see when I shave. That is enough. It has to be.